Welcome to Alan, who's just joined us for our session on revolutionizing the accounting curriculum. So I will hand straight over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Paul. I've just come up against a little problem here. Right, that's me back. Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be able to have this opportunity to speak about something that I feel quite strongly about. It's something that arose out of what we found when Greg Stone and Barbara Flood and I did a study about COVID. And it's just basically, and its impact on accounting education. And it's really just following on from that towards how I see the future of accounting education over the next, however many years you want. Now I'll put a codicil around it. The views I've got are, if you like, assuming that we'll be rational. And past experience of accounting education during my career, all 39 years of it, tells me that in terms of what we teach, we're not very rational at all. We are firefighters. We respond to what we perceive to be professional demands. And we are increasingly treating the students in a way that isn't going to help them to actually learn very much. It's not through any fault of ours or theirs, it's just the way that the world's moving. And really, the message I'm going to end up with at the end of this is basically saying we've got to stop and realize that we're educators. We're not in a factory producing homogeneous goods. We should be treating our students as individuals, and we should be tailoring the way we teach to achieving what they actually need to be able to do when they leave university. So that's really setting a broad scene for it. Now I'm just going to run through this, which is how I believe that accounting education is changing and will change increasingly over the coming years. As we all know, COVID had big impacts, and a lot of places across the world had a lot of problems because of it. We had a lot of disruption to everyone's lives who was involved in education of our discipline, and other disciplines had the same problems. One of the untalked of categories compared to the others is the administrators. They also had a terrible time of it. But faculty learnt how to teach differently. And that was done by satisficing effectively, by cherry picking the syllabus, generally speaking, picking what was perceived to be the things that had to be covered and covering them, and just dropping everything else. So the content shrunk. The number of hours that were actually spent teaching shrunk. And this is me talking generally based on talking to numerous different people and just pulling all the feedback I got. And technology, of course, was embraced, but there was a major problem that we found in our study of technology deprivation, which affected not just students, which is what we would expect, but also affected faculty in various parts of the world who suddenly had to try and teach online with no equipment. It was catastrophic for them, but it was usually, in most places, we were all able to cope. And one thing that came out of that was that faculty can be extremely flexible. Now you think about your colleagues, and I've been head of department myself. I remember when I started teaching, and I was told, right, you're teaching 6 different subjects. And I said, I'm an accountant. They said, it doesn't matter. You've got a business studies degree. You can teach the whole syllabus. So I was teaching law, economics, management, and a little bit of accounting. And that type of flexibility seems to have disappeared. I find it's very difficult to encourage colleagues to try something new, never mind something they studied as students or studied even in their professional accounting exams. They're happy with what they do, and that's all they want to do. And that's a significant change that I think crept up on us between, well, in my career, between 1983 and about 2010. But what COVID showed was that there's still this facility to be flexible if the need arises. So if people really feel they have to be flexible, they will be. However, the flexibility in this case was using technology, not learning about new subjects and developing new teaching materials on new topics. It was about just redoing the way you do your teaching. So there was a bit of flexibility then, but the cost was really far too great. One of the things that was done across the sector, as far as I can see, was that we learned how to examine students differently. Now, when I say learn, I'm not meaning it in a positive way at all. Standards achieved were ignored. In other words, it was grade inflation. Pass rates were inflated. I know of universities where accounting students were just given passes for the year and moved on. And I'm sure most of you are aware of that as well. So as a result, that had a knock-on effect in the subsequent year, and a knock-on effect in the subsequent year to that. So in this year, there are students in the third year of the degree who've barely had to achieve anything in the first two, and they're struggling. During the first year of COVID, certificate, diplomas and degrees were awarded with the controllable assessment reduced. And as I've said often to people who are listening to me, my wife was given a diploma and had no assessment at all. She was just handed the diploma at the end of the course. And that diploma is currency to go on to some next stage, and that will be accepted, even though she never set any assessment. So faculty learned to get around the problems by changing the way they assessed and by turning a blind eye effectively to the lack of knowledge, understanding of the students. Students also learned to game this new world, which was a problem because once they worked out how to operate in it, it meant that they could manipulate faculty. And I may come back to that later on. Now, faculty learned not just how to adapt to it, but how to game it. And there are two distinct strands as I can see it. Faculty who did not care about the quality of their teaching, did not attempt to do anything different. They were barely affected by this whole practice, other than that they had to start doing stuff on videos and that. They didn't put in the extra effort. You won't hear them complaining about very much other than a lack of freedom or a lack of flexibility, maybe a lack of contact with students, but they won't complain about their workload in terms of how much extra they were doing, because quite frankly, they were doing less. And then the other faculty who did the opposite, who did care about their teaching, and they completely changed how they were approaching what they taught to make it engage the students. So you had these two schools of thought, and I'll be kind and just say the lazy ones didn't care that the others had too much. So there's a friction developed. And my perception is that the wise move was not to do very much. And that did nothing for the quality of accounting education. During that period, or this period, the last 2 years, education has no longer been a priority. It just seemed to fall off a cliff. The student well-being was number one. I've lost count of the number of times I've been asked to be nice to a student because they're suffering because of COVID. Not because they're ill, but because of COVID, its existence. The student's not doing any work. We'll be nice to them. Don't penalize them. Don't criticize them because they might react badly to it. So how on earth are we meant to pull the students forward and make them active learners, never mind learners who actually achieve what they really need to achieve? Faculty well-being during the first year of COVID was not a priority. They suffered from a lot of stress, a lot of burnout, and some took early retirement because they just got fed up. The impact in some institutions was terrible, in some countries was worse. I know several very eminent accounting academics in Australia and in New Zealand who have no jobs anymore. they were just told, right, we've got no students, so off you go. And in the UK, we really got off lightly with that one because we didn't have the same level of dependency in international students. Accounting education, I believe, will change permanently because of the response to COVID, in that it demonstrated that we could be flexible in the use of technology. And institutions that paid attention to this are going to save a lot of capital investment because they don't need the big lecture theatres they used to need if they use the common sense, because we've demonstrated we can deliver lectures without going into a classroom. And the faculty in some cases learned they could use technology to save them a lot of effort by just repeating their videos again. And I know of universities where staff in this academic year were prohibited from using any material they developed for last year's course modules, even though they were teaching exactly the same subjects. They had to do new videos, new exercises, nothing repeated. So that suggests to me that in some cases it was being abused by the staff, and that universities woke up to it, or alternatively, universities felt that people had to do something for their living and so refused them to allow them that easy route to getting the material done for the lectures. But I think the last point there, that large lectures are wasted resources, is something that's been on the horizon for at least 60 years, and finally it's got there. As to whether most universities will be brave enough to do it, I don't know. But that is, in my opinion, pedagogically one of the good things that came out of COVID. However, when people discuss it, the arguments are all over the place. Faculty claim it makes it easier for students if lectures are online because they can choose when to listen. But research shows that students do not attend traditional lectures. So what is the solution there? How does a lecture work? If it's easier for students when it's online, does that mean they're going to listen to it when previously they wouldn't have attended? Well, actually, no, COVID showed us that students don't attend when it's a lecture that's asynchronous. And I myself had a lot of data that I gathered from a huge cohort of 250 students, which demonstrated very forcibly that they just did not look at the asynchronous lecture material. So switching to a broadcast lectures, if you like, or asynchronous lectures as opposed to face-to-face, has its problems. And one of the things that's needed in order for that to work, if universities do decide to go down that route and not have anyone in a classroom, is the students need to be trained in how to use the equipment and how to react to the videos that they're watching or whatever else it is. And we're not even near that yet. So there's a risk that we'll start going too fast, and we need to be prepared for that and what it would entail. During that first year of COVID, as we found out in our study, and this all of us will have experienced, students didn't, I just put my phone on silent, sorry about that. Students just wouldn't put on their videos, the microphones weren't connected, they hated being turned to us to turn on videos and microphones. And at this point, I'll say one word, and I'm saying it without any hint of sarcasm or any hint of bias or antagonism. Snowflakes. We're dealing with a generation that needs to be encouraged to do things, not commanded to do it. And in that circumstance, we weren't prepared for that. We hadn't sussed out the difference between the way that the people born 20, 30 years ago think and react to criticism compared to us. So we lack the training to make that work. Maybe in the long term, we'll be able to, we'll get assistance in working a way of doing that with those students. But during COVID, that was a real problem. Text comments replaced the students' verbal interaction. And that was a nightmare for anyone teaching 100 students. You got to monitor a chat while you're trying to do synchronous teaching to a group of 100 students you can't see, as I had to do with 250. It's impossible. So the students therefore got another problem because we didn't know how to deal with that. We couldn't get them to communicate in a conventional way, and we couldn't look at what they were communicating to us with. And we didn't have the time to work out that what we needed was a second person in the room to monitor the chat. And nor did we have the resources for that. So this was something that, again, if we go on to any sort of online activity with students in future, we need to work out how to deal with the way they respond and the way we and achieve what we're trying to achieve. Faculty who cared about being good teachers, I hated that, we all know that, and some resigned because they now absolutely detested the job they used to love. So taking all that on board, I've no doubt that blended learning will be the new normal, partly online, partly face-to-face. Online assessment will become a new norm because it's much more convenient, it's much cheaper, it's much easier to administer. You've only got the problem of cheating. And the software's out there that we could get around that. But overall, it might be a big step forward for us if that happened. It also might encourage us to do more continuous assessment as opposed to formal exams. And that would be a big plus because continuous assessment encourages students to engage in a way that exams just do not. So you might find that the standard of the students go up if we can move exams to one side and use continuous assessment. But then we accounting educators have a problem of accreditation, which wants exams. So we need to decide what we're going to do with that. And the way I see it, I can't see accreditation actually managing to hold up if there's a serious shift in the direction that we now know we can go as a result of the experience under COVID. And even more changes are coming, and these are syllabus related changes. Now these topics are the ones that are sort of headlining over the last 12 months, big data, data analytics, artificial intelligence, in fact, longer than that. We are being sort of encouraged to get these into our syllabuses. And 12, 18 months ago, there was enough noise going around to suggest some people were actually thinking of doing it. But this reminded me of the difference in the response in the UK compared to the US to the emergence of SAP in large companies, of ERP systems in the 90s, 80s and 90s, where the American universities, many of them, developed modules in SAP. There were none in the UK, absolutely none. We didn't bother doing it, even though it was clear this was something that was going to be impacting accountancy in the future. These three are absolutely fundamental to the future role of an accountant or an auditor. And if we don't get them into our syllabuses are going to look even more unfit for purpose than they do at the moment. So if I was looking to the future, I would say that we should be putting these into our syllabus and making it something that stood out, whether you do it as an auditing course, because all of them are can be related directly to audit. You got continuous auditing, continuous monitoring, you use AI to do it, and it embraces big data and data analytics. But who teaching audit has the skill to teach those subjects? It's just not going to happen unless there's changes in recruitment. And I'll come back to that as well later on. So who's going to teach them? That's a problem. Some topics have been rediscovered and become priority topics because they're flavor of the month. So you get ESG. Prior to this, I've taught that subject. I've taught it in Australia for 3 years because it was important there. It was part of the final year capstone course in the accounting degree. The people that teach it in the UK generally teach it either because they're enthusiastic about it or because they've been pushed to do it. And in the case of the ones that have been pushed to do it, they're not too keen on doing it. It's going to be done properly. Who's going to teach it? How are we going to get all these specialists in this subject, environmental, social and governance, in every accounting department in order for that to become something that's prominent in all accounting degrees? It's not trivial, including something that is as complex as that subject can be at the right level. And you also got the accounting profession starting to speak up quietly. There's too much coverage of unnecessary technical topics. This has been gathering ahead of steam, not just in Europe, but elsewhere. It's is generally beginning to be recognized by the profession that we're not actually teaching the students what they really need to know. And that takes me back to 1992 or two, I think, when I was at a meeting of 30 people called ICAW fellows, and we were the up and coming shining lights in the accounting academe in the UK. And we were given the title of ICAW fellow by the English Institute. And we all had a meeting with the head of the board of accreditation, at which he said, when we're looking at the accounting degrees for accreditation purposes, we tick boxes. When we talk to the profession, what they want is to make sure that we've ticked the boxes, but they absolutely detest our students because what they want from them is the ability to do double entry and nothing else. And if there's one thing the universities don't provide, it's double entry expertise in the graduates. And this is now rearing its ugly head again, and this time it's to do with accounting standards more than anything else. There's too little emphasis on what employers need. And those of you that have been around for as long as me, and those of you that have been around for done education research, for example, will be aware that there's a long history of literature on what employers need. And that the soft skills have been dominant in that literature since the 1980s. Accounting education, I believe, will become very different across the world, depending on how people respond to the changes in the demand for the content, for example, the AI bit. In some countries, most technical subjects will slowly disappear because accounting faculty will recognize what the profession wants, not what they're telling us to teach, which are two different things. We'll recognize what they want, and the technical subjects they'll test the water and they'll discover, actually, we don't actually need to teach all those accounting standards the way we're doing it. We don't have to spend that long length of time on it. They'll be quite happy to accept that we cover them very lightly. And we can then get more subjects into the syllabus that fit what the profession really wants. Accounting programs will no longer teach students how to be accountants, and they never should have taught students how to be accountants, but that's the way it's gone in the last 30 years before they graduate. Instead, they will teach students how to become accountants, which is what some of you will know, Dick Wilson, who was the first chair of the accounting education SIG and founded the journal Accounting Education. His bee in his bonnet was always, we should be teaching students how to become accountants after they graduate. So it's not a new story, a new thing, a new theme. But I think that we'll now find that it finally begins to happen, and that accounting faculty slowly but surely, and accounting programs slowly but surely move in that direction and move away from the heavy emphasis on technical content. Double entry, I believe, may be the only technical subject to survive. Now you might say, well, that's ridiculous, because it's boring and tedious and no one can teach it, because we no longer have accountants coming to join our departments. We're getting people with PhDs. Since I did a study in 1993, and the vast majority of accounting faculty in the UK were professionally qualified. The number of PhDs you could almost put on one hand, fingers on one hand, the number of PhDs working in accounting departments, and the whole thing's gone completely upside down. And all these people we recruited with PhDs, most of them can't do things like double entry. So what do they teach? They can't do double entry, they can't do financial accounting, they can't do management accounting. It's like we're in a mess. But I believe that double entry will survive because it's got one big advantage. That if you go through the literature on it, research literature on it, over the last 100 years, the literature overwhelmingly says that students cannot do double entry when they graduate. And this is through periods when it was taught a lot to periods when it's taught very little. And why can't they do it? Because double entry is not a rule-based technical subject. You can't do double entry with rules. So we teach them the rules. They come across an example they've never seen before, they can't do it. So I think we have an option, we have opportunity to start teaching it as a critical subject and teach it in final year students, where we challenge them to be able to do double entry by basing their approach on principles and move away from rules and get them to understand double entry. And that'll enhance the critical thinking skills beyond belief. But I think it'll survive because it's the one thing that distinguishes accountants from the rest of society. Auditing will survive much change. There'll be an introductory module on financial reporting, costing, and management accounting, with a user perspective emphasized, because you're trying to show the students what is done with the accounting information, because that's the sort of thing they need to know when they go into the profession or into industry. What do we do with this information? Not how to do it. They'll learn how to do it when they're doing the professional courses, learning to become the qualified accountant they want to be. We don't need to teach them how to do those things. Far more subjects from other disciplines should become part of our degrees. And when I was at Sussex in 2016, I put together a complete accounting degree, which satisfied all of the accreditation requirements currently in place for ACCA papers 1 to 9. And it was dominated by these subjects. It never got a final, it failed at the final hurdle for approval, and then I left. So it never got done. But we can fit all these subjects into their degrees at the moment. Never mind if we negotiate with the professional bodies regarding accreditation a little bit more strongly. Accounting programs will be mainly about social science people, because that's what accountants are. Accountants are not bean counters. Accountants are people that have to communicate to the outside world what the accounting numbers mean. Less need for accounting faculty as we know the role today because of all the changes. So you won't be appointing people to teach financial accounting for 3 years, for example. You'd be teaching it for 1 year. There's no need to teach any more than that. You'll be appointing people to teach audit for more than one module, because you're bringing in the AI and the data analytics and all that. And you'll be bringing in the social science subjects. So in the same way that we've recruited finance people to the accounting departments, we'll start to recruit social scientists. A new breed of accounting faculty will take the place of the ones we have today. And I think the one professor is much closer to reality than it was before. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying it's tempting opportunity for people to save and economize. And COVID has shown that faculty can teach and assess in different ways, and profession itself will be more effective now in changing what is taught. And I think the profession not from the professional bodies only, but also from the professional firms, I think we'll start listening to what they've got to say. In time, I think accounting departments, as we know them, will disappear. Accounting degrees will, as we know them, will disappear from the university catalogues, because employers will not employ anyone with one. It's going to be simple as that. If we don't change what we teach to take account of what is wanted by the employers, we won't have any jobs for our graduates. I think the one professional concept will teach the world accounting topics, whether it's people all latching on to something that's done at Stanford University, or people latching on to something done at Glasgow University. The difficulty with the one professor is the not invented here syndrome that was very prominent in the literature on computer-based learning instruction in the 1990s. It is a real problem. It's a psychological problem. But if people get over it and start to use that technology with someone else's material, I think the one professor will start to take root. If you look at some of the YouTube videos done by accounting professors and look at how many people have watched them, you can see that there is a potential there for this sort of thing to take off. The one professor, whether it's the real one professor, it's just the professor doing videos for a course, that'll be the textbook. You won't have textbooks anymore. They're done and dusted. Basically everything of that equivalent of the textbook will be available in other ways. Small classes will be where learning takes place, where knowledge, understanding, application happens. But for that to work, we've got to make another change to the way accounting programs are organized, and that is to have a flipped classroom approach, where you get the tuition from the one professor, the video, the synchronous video, the lecture, and then you build on it in the seminar. So the students have to look at the one professor first. Students will need to be taught how to learn in that environment, or it will not happen. There's a lot of, we need to change, students need to change, we need to change how we train the students. The bookkeepers will be technicians of accounting in the future, and that's something we need to really be aware of. It's been in, people have been talking about this for the last 5 years, at least, how entry-level positions in accounting in many parts of the world don't exist anymore. And there will be zero accountants as we know them today, because accountants won't do the jobs or the tasks that we think they're doing today. They will be performing a different role, because there's this shift where the computer is taking over a lot of the entry-level positions, so on, and people are becoming much more, accountants are becoming much more people. Now, this is not a new situation. Being skilled at mathematics was the important thing in the period before anywhere other than Italy used double entry bookkeeping. It was mathematics that was what the auditors had to be able to do. And it was mathematics that the bookkeepers had to be good at, not double entry. And the bookkeepers were the merchants. And we actually know that for a fact, because in the first printed textbook on how to do double entry, the author, Luca Pacioli, actually says that mathematics is far more important than double entry. And if you can't do the double entry, you can fix it with the maths. So it was maths that was important, and bookkeepers were primarily mathematicians. And this continued until people started to teach double entry in courses around about 1600. But mathematics continued to be very important for auditors and bookkeepers until the 20th century. And some of the early university accounting departments or accounting faculty were appointed to the maths department in the United States. In the 20th century, financial reporting replaced maths and became much more important. It's all going to change again. Being able to understand double entry will be the key technical skill as it is today. And if you ever meet an accountant who cannot do, a professionally qualified accountant who cannot do double entry, if you're like me, you'll be wondering why on earth they're an accountant. Being able to understand, interpret, verify, and explain information is an essential skill for anyone working as an accountant, and interpersonal skills will be the dominant skill of any person working as an accountant, which is effectively what the literature on what the profession requires in accounting graduates has been telling us since the 1990s. So this is not new. It's just that it's become much more obvious. AI and information technology will do the rest of what accountants do today. And I put a little list there. There's very little that these technologies cannot do now. Accountants will be business advisors with very highly developed interpersonal skills. Accounting programs will need to provide graduates with these skills, or employers will not employ them. That's the point I made earlier. To achieve this, you've got to have a lot more in the accounting program, mainly from the social sciences, and much less rules, regulations, technical procedures. And if accounting is going to continue to be a degree awarding subject, it needs to focus on developing these skills and stop trying to teach students to be the competent accountants when they graduate, because employers will not want them. Employers want to train them themselves. And accounting programs need to be dominated by subjects from human relations, etc., especially communication studies. Now, it's not a gloomy, depressing vision, and I'm nearly finished. This new accountant will be broad-minded extrovert. Can you imagine that? Accountants typically will become broad-minded extroverts. That's the complete opposite of the concept of an accountant in most people's minds. My next door neighbors can't believe in an accountant. Anyway, they'll have higher status and greater respect as a result. New accounting faculty will not carry the baggage of teaching rules they barely understand, or they struggle with themselves, regulations that keep changing too fast to keep up, procedures and processes, And the range of topics he'll teach will be broader, far more relevant to the world where accounting is used. So much easier to use real world examples that actually make sense. Accounting programs will become truly fit for purpose, and the graduates will be attractive to employers, and not just in the accounting profession, but because we're making more rounded individuals who can communicate, they'll be attractive to people way beyond the accounting profession. Accounting graduates will be open-minded, extroverts, well-equipped for a life of learning and change. But for all this to happen, I think COVID has given us a leg up. It started us off. It has said to us, look, you guys, you can be different if you want to be different. You've just got to take that step. COVID pushed us into doing it. Now that we've learned that we can be a bit flexible, when we put that into the context of what's the noise is coming out of the profession about what we should be teaching, about the new subjects, the new areas, the new things that should be in there. Now, above any other period in the time I've been a teacher, this is the time to think about what we should be doing. And I think we should be doing, and I believe that ultimately we will end up teaching this much more rounded individual in a very different syllabus. But for it all to happen, we need to train the students on how to learn in this new environment. Our third year students don't know how to be students because they've had 2 years of not being conventional students. And it's very, very obvious as I look at the students I'm teaching that they really haven't got the student skills that you'd expect, never mind anything else. We need to train the teachers, the accounting faculty need to be taught. When I started teaching, it was mandatory for me to do a 10-week intensive teacher training course in Glasgow. The waiting list for that course was 5 years. I never got on it because I moved from my first job in a polytechnic into university at the end of 4 years. But I really regretted that, and I went off and did a 1-year teacher training course myself after I've been teaching for about 5 years, because none of us knows how to teach without getting some tuition and how to do it. So we need to train the teachers, but train them to deal with this new environment, teach them to deal with students who will not communicate in conventional ways when they're using unconventional interaction, like using IT to attend classes. We need training badly, and we need training in how to teach these new subjects, because they're not trivial. We can teach them as trivial subjects, but won't do the students any good. And we need to train the administrators and encourage them to develop some flexibility in the rules that they're having to apply, which means you've got to be able to, the whole unit of our universities need to rethink how we should be teaching and assessing. And finally, I'm going to say something that I said 9 years ago. When I went to Australia in 2012, I was astonished at the difference in the educational environment there compared to here. Absolutely astonished. And the year after I'd been there, I did a plenary at an educators conference in Melbourne, and I said this: accounting educators must stop treating accounting education as a conveyor belt of routine mediocrity. That's what it's become. What our education system in this country has become is what it was like in Australia in 2012. The student is always right, and we have to hit our targets mentality. We've got to stop that. We've got to stop treating students as homogeneous products that we either pass or fail. And we got to start treating them as individuals. And if we do that, then their opportunities to develop their interpersonal skills will be vastly more improved. And our teaching will become much more interesting. So anyway, I think there'll be a lot of changes over the next few years. I'm probably talking in extremes. In fact, I know I am. But there will be changes ahead. And I hope that we take on board the lessons from COVID. And we also learn from the issues that we now face with recruitment and with departments that are full of people who cannot actually effectively teach what we're teaching in accounting, and try and put the recruitment away from seeking people with PhDs to seeking people with the right skill sets. Because if we're going to make a future for departments of accountancy in the universities, we've not only got to change our syllabuses, we've got to change our recruitment. And with that, I will stop.